Good afternoon, everyone. As always, we start with acknowledging that UBC's Vancouver campus located on the traditional territories of the Muslim people, and recognize that you may come from lands whose ancestral caretakers deserve our recognition. Welcome to the very first TLSS of the season. Simon Bates is UBC's first Vice Provost and Associate Vice President, Teaching and Learning, and was appointed the first tenured Professor of Teaching in 2012. Thanks for paving the road for us.
Yeah, thank you.
When the Educational Leadership stream was created, he has worked at the interface of educational innovation and technology enhanced learning for 25 years. And over that time he has been at UBC, he has led a number of education transformation projects. With the possible exception of COVID, none of these projects have felt quite so huge in terms of scope, implications, and urgency than the challenges we currently face. Today, Simon will deliver a keynote talk titled Teaching and Learning in Higher Education is Radically Changing, whether you like it or not. How to respond. Tip of the iceberg, I guess, that we could be talking for weeks. If this title fills you with dread, then Simon will balance out that sentiment with his firm belief that UBC as an institution is well positioned to rise to the challenges of this rapidly shifting landscape, but it won't be easy. It is less than 3 years since ChatGPT became widely available and rapidly adopted, both as a standalone tool and through integration into other digital platforms. In that short time frame, students have taken up these tools extensively, and faculty have struggled with the implications of integrity of assessment and assurance of learning. All institutions have tried to keep up with rapid advances in tool capability, running on a very different clock speed to that of academia. Simon will offer some insight into how UBC is trying to navigate this challenge for faculties and academic units, and the implications of individual educators teaching the courses. Before we continue, I would like to thank the public for coming here, and the Dean's Office for supporting this, Michelle and her team for setting things up, and everyone who has been part of the Teaching and Learning seminar series so far. Apologies for the room, the size of the screen in particular pales in comparison to the magnificence of your talk. But that's what we have now. It's been really difficult to book rooms, but this will be renovated, so hopefully next time we'll have you in a better setting. But
Thank you.
Round of applause for
No judgment for the size of your presentation screen. I'm frantically thinking, do I have anything on the slides that's an 8-point font? I don't think I do. I'm also going to, it's not my usual style to lecture from the pulpit, but I'm being captured for posterity, apparently. So at least some of the time, a desire for my face to be on the Zoom camera. So I was asked to do this and also asked to be a little bit provocative. So I'm going to be a little bit provocative. I would like to think we're a fairly small and well-behaved group, so I would largely well-behaved. So I would like to encourage sort of dialogue and conversation. It's not a keynote lecture. I want it to be a conversation. So by all means, if you have questions or want to challenge points as we go through, then please do so. And we'll see how far we get. I've got sort of 45 minutes or so of material, and depending on the conversation, we may or may not get there. So, my thing was going too slow, too fast. So, you know, the sort of provocative title, which I said to Rob last week, I said, I wrote this while I was jet lagged overseas. Just before I went to sleep for the first time in about 36 hours. And I woke up 3 a.m. in the morning thinking, oh, maybe that's too provocative. So as an alternative title, you can have Charting the Future of Learning and Teaching in an increasingly AI-infused world. Just in terms of an outline, I'm going to start by talking about what's not in the talk. And what's not in this talk is, here are 17 cool things you can do with generative AI tools. That's a completely different talk. Many of you have probably experimented. I'm going to do some polling in a minute. So if you have a device with you like your phone, I will, unlike with your students, I will positively encourage you to take it out for what's coming up in the next couple of minutes, because I'd like to get a sense of people's comfort level with the topic that I'm talking about. So it's not going to be, hey, here are 15 cool examples of things that I have done. I do want to spend a little bit just finding out what your degree of comfort is, and then I'm going to talk about things that really worry me about these technologies. I am predominantly pro AI as a learning tool, but as I'm sure many of you realize, it's a very double-edged sword in terms of some of the challenges and some of the risks associated with it. And I've been thinking a lot about, what does this mean for students? What does this mean for essentially the value proposition of why students should come here to study whatever degree they're studying for 4 years, pay a lot of money, possibly run up debts that will last quite a long time. What's that value proposition in a world where AI is readily available and baked into many, if not all, of the applications that they use? At that point, we will all be filled with existential dread. So I'll try and bring it back to some sort of practical advice, guidance, information on what we're doing. And I'm going to sort of offer 3 perspectives. What the university is doing, so that's what I've been doing in my portfolio for the last couple of years. And then think about what kind of conversation should be happening at a faculty level, and this kind of discussion is a great start for that. And then the implications for individual faculty and how they construct and design the assessments in their courses. Okay, so should you have a phone, please feel free to take it out. You should, even on a small screen, be able to scan that QR code. It should take you to a Mentimeter link. I once saw someone, when I've done this, trying to do it with a laptop by turning the laptop round and pointing the camera. That's why the numerical code is there, if anyone hasn't brought a laptop. Okay, if you're having problems logging in, I'll give you just 10 more seconds. And then you should see the first question, which is just to get a sense of who is in the room. Okay. So predominantly faculty, but with a sprinkling, and I've kind of differentiated. I realize it might be a somewhat artificial segregation to split up teaching and learning support and IT or learning technology support, leadership, and students. I always like it when there's students in the audience. Because, as you will see, okay, student. Sorry. As you'll see a little bit later in my slides, they have some really interesting perspectives when we ask them what they are thinking about this technology. Okay, now we get on to some Likert scale questions. The statement is, I am a confident and fluent user of Gen AI tools. Would you just rate your, completely anonymous. I have no IP addresses or anything like that.
I think those of us who don't have a phone with us have probably already rated ourselves.
Okay. No, you just may be choosing to have some, not be digitally distracted. That's absolutely fine. Okay. So that's a broad distribution, a little bit shifted to the higher end, but you know what? Typically, when I do that, that's a very typical distribution. This you get a range of sort of degrees of comfort with using the tools, and you know there's 27, 28 people, so that's a reasonably good number. Okay, I am optimistic about how AI tools may enhance learning. was going to say similarly flat distribution, but not looking very flat. It's looking skewed towards the I don't buy it. Okay. So I would rate myself on the last question fairly fluent. I use these tools regularly. I've done for a couple of years. When I had an admin leave a couple of years ago, I went back to school and learned just enough machine learning to be dangerous in an unsupervised context. And I would also rate myself somewhere around 4 or 5. I really am optimistic about how these tools can support personalized learning, how it can support students with different learning accommodations, and really level the playing field in a system that has not been particularly level for some learners for a long time. Okay, last one. I am concerned about how AI might erode key learning skills. I realize I'm letting you all see the results. I should blank the screen so you can't see. So, okay, so that's definitely skewed towards the right hand, and I would strongly agree with this as well. I am, for all the potential benefits, I am really concerned about how this could erode key learning skills, because it's so easy. For those of you who have used these tools, when driven well, when you understand what you're doing and how to get the most out of them, they're pretty amazing. And they can short circuit an awful lot of the thinking or doing processes that we expect students to do. I teach in Science 113. It's the first year science writing seminar. It's a small cohort class, 25 students, first year students. And so our first writing assignment, our first essay, is like an 800-word scientific argumentation essay. It's exactly the type of thing that these tools, even 2.5 years ago, could do really, really well. So, and the temptation for some students is really there to take the frictionless, easy way out. One of my colleagues at a different institution who I've worked with says, left unchecked, students can view these tools as assessment vending machines. So they can just go there and they can put in the assessment requirements and they can do all kinds of things to evade detection. And it's a real challenge. Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful. So I've tried to sum up in one slide where I think we are late 2025. And this slide probably needs updating about every 2 or 3 months, because that is how fast things are changing in this space. So we're seeing AI-infused applications proliferate. So if any of you use, well, I'm sure you will use OneDrive. There's now functionality within our Microsoft 365 license where you can have a copilot will summarize your OneDrive documents. If you do a Google search on your phone, you'll probably get the AI summary at the top. It's becoming routinely infused into the kind of digital applications that we use for our work and students also use for their learning and for their lives. It presents an additional perspective or another lens on the value proposition of a degree. And there will be cheaper alternatives cropping up, offering students AI-powered introductory calculus or introductory physics at a fraction of the cost of what we can offer. Student use is increasing, but they don't feel adequately prepared, and they are very concerned about violations of academic integrity. That data is from a group called the Digital Education Council, which is a network of about 80 universities, of which UBC is a member. But we see that replicated in our own student survey data, which I'll show you a little bit of later. Students will use these tools, no matter what our syllabi say. That doesn't mean we shouldn't put things on our syllabus, but we should be absolutely clear on when, how, and if students can use these tools in assessments. And that probably needs to be resolved to individual assessments, not just a blanket statement across the entire course. The next one might be a little bit unfair, but my sense is people made largely discursive changes to assessments rather than structural ones. So they said, please don't use these tools beyond drafting the outline of your essay, with really no ability to be able to detect compliance or otherwise. And it's not surprising. Structural changes to assessments are really, really hard. You know, they're hard to do for an individual course, let alone across 3, 4, 5 courses that you might teach in a given year. And for everything that I said about the opportunity to level the playing field, there's beginning to be some empirical work on this accumulation of cognitive debt from over-relying on these tools. And that's beginning to be experimentally verified. In other words, unchecked use, or just leaving students to figure out how to use these tools on their own, can lead to an accumulation of cognitive debt. And my sense is, I don't have any evidence for this, but it's probably going to be the weaker of our students that are building this up more quickly and more consistently across courses. So that is a sort of brief summary of where I think we are. Things I worry about this erosion of thinking skills. That's why it was a question in the poll. I kind of worry about the unanticipated consequences, right? 17 years ago when we got smartphones for the first time, when the Apple iPhone was released, no one could have, or few people I think, could have foreseen some of the toxic implications of social media, particularly for young people. Right? So that's maybe a lot further down the line, but I still worry about unintended or unanticipated consequences. I worry about the scale and pace of change, right? Because again, going back to the course that I teach, we've had to revise our assessment strategies every year for the last 3 years to try and keep pace with how the landscape is shifting. And that's what Andres said in the introduction. There are 2 very different clock speeds running here. Academia, which is measured in semesters and committees, and the advances of these tools, which is measured in months. I worry about how on earth are we going to pay for this, right? One of the things that I was asked a couple of years ago is, when is UBC going to license ChatGPT for all its faculty or all its students? Because, you know, equity issues, some students are paying, some students can't afford to pay, some students are paying $200 a month, some are paying $25 a month. We can't afford to do that, right? The bill we would have for faculty is about $4 million a year. That's 4 times what we spend on licensing Canvas as the learning management system across the university. And it's about 3 times what we pay for the Microsoft license, or IT pays for the Microsoft license. And that's just faculty, right? That's not faculty and staff, and it's certainly not 72,000 students. And with all of that, that leads to unevenness. You will have students who will pay for the paid versions of these tools. You'll have others that are using smaller models or less advanced models, and therefore don't have the same access. So I worry about a lot of these things, and there's no sort of easy solution. So I've started to think about what does this mean for how we articulate what it means to read a university degree, to study for a university degree. And I went back to about 10 years ago, the idea of blended learning entered the mainstream. And certainly I think most people came across that idea during COVID as well. What that did, and it was sort of underpinned by technologies like the internet and reasonably cheap computing devices for everyone, it led us think differently about time. We could do things synchronously or asynchronously by recording things and making them available. And we could do things differently in space as well. We could do things in person, or we could do things online. And this was essentially how we all had to adapt to COVID 5.5 years ago. But this was very instructor driven in that we made the choices about how our courses were going to blend in person and online. I think what we're doing is we're doing that again. And I can't think of any better phrase other than calling it reblended learning. But the blending is not online or in person. It's blending between human and AI augmented. So the idea of this is a mixture of human effort and digital augmentation through these tools. And it's much more personal and therefore student driven, because the student or the learner or each of us gets to decide how we use these tools, when we don't use these tools, how we evaluate what comes out of these tools. So what we're trying to think about, and again, many of you will have seen the president has just launched the refreshed strategic plan. One of the 7 directions is around emerging technologies, which is largely, but not exclusively, AI. What I think we need to do is develop a value proposition for students that fuses the essential skills of human effort with the empowerment of digital tools. Learning is really, really hard. It takes a struggle, and really to master something, I think you have to be prepared to undergo that struggle. It's not as frictionless or as easy as these tools would have you believe. And some students will conflate doing with learning, right? And they're not the same things at all. And so I think we're going to have a harder time selling that ideal to students, to say you need to be prepared to struggle. And at the same time, we have to demonstrate how they can use these tools to amplify or empower them, or, one of my colleagues has said, these tools can give students superpowers if used appropriately, but not shortcut the essential struggle or effort that's required. And it's really, really hard to get that balance right. It's going to look different in different programs. It's going to look different in different courses. Why I think it matters is in an era where things are doable essentially without friction using these tools, we risk losing some of these essential skills, or depriving themselves of the opportunity to master them. So that, I think, is our challenge. We've started to craft, I'll make these slides available afterwards. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but we've started to try and articulate, what do principles look like? Well, we've got to put humans first. If we want to be in the business of offering largely in-person residential programs, then we need to put that human-centered aspect of learning right at the heart. But equally, that does not mean you say we've got to ban these tools, right? And that is an approach that many people would love to take. Can we ban them, or can we police them so that we know exactly when they're being used? And of course, this plays out very differently in different disciplinary or pedagogical contexts. It also plays out differently for learners at different stages of maturity, right? So the group I worry about the most are incoming first years, because they will have had a couple of years of using these tools and maybe, over relying on some of that frictionless convenience. And so their habits are already set when they come onto campus in every September. This clearly has all kinds of implications. It has implications for how we build curriculum. It has implications for how we do assessment. It has implications for faculty development. I'm not going to touch on it too much in this talk, but I think what it means to be an educator in a university is being changed by these technologies. And I don't mean it's devaluing your subject matter expertise, that's still important. But our role as academics and educators is predicated on kind of being the smartest person in the room with a group of students, right? And there will definitely be areas where we really are still the smartest person in the room, but we're not necessarily the most accessible. We're not the most convenient for students. And particularly in those foundational years, they have other choices where they can get reliable, largely accurate information and guidance and personalized learning at 2 o'clock in the morning in their dorm room. They can ask the same type of problem over and over again, ask for help in different ways. And the AI tool that they're using is not going to say, sorry, that's the end of my office hour. I've got to go and go to a meeting or something. So I think it's changing our roles as faculty members. And the other thing I'm really aware of is not all of this can be heaped onto faculty members teaching courses. You can't be expected, we can't be expected to bring students critical thinking about how to use AI tools solely within our courses. We need a program of support for students that provides some of that, just in the same way that you may provide some tailored guidance to students about careers or pathways after graduation, but we also have a career service to do that. So I think we also, as an institution, need to invest in building student supports to help them realize that there are going to be times when they need to struggle. They shouldn't be taking the frictionless short circuit route out. I can talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing in that respect. It's going to have implications for program level outcomes. What are the attributes of a BSc or a BA going to look like in this area? Professional programs are already seeing this. There are competencies being built in around the critical and ethical use of these tools. I think we're seeing it in the health disciplines first. And there's many examples from health disciplines where these tools actually enhance the performance of physicians in interpreting radiographs or x-rays or things like that. Course level outcomes, and as I say, granular assessment level outcomes for individual assignments. Okay to feel overwhelmed, because it is kind of overwhelming, because what I've basically said is everything is changing and it needs to change right down to individual assessments. So what I want to try and share are some sort of practical suggestions at 3 different levels. I'll tell you a little bit about what the institution is trying to do, what we're trying to do. Some of the things I think need to operate at a faculty or a department level, and then individual course level or assignment level discussions. And please, the invitation to stop me and interrupt is a genuine one. We don't have to wait until the end.
Can I ask a question then?
Yeah, please.
You talking about assessments.
Yeah.
Is something that's come up talking about ungrading or being a little bit different in your evaluation of how people are assessed?
Yes. We already have, and I know you know this, a group of faculty who are interested in, I don't like the word ungrading, it's alternative grading strategies, right? Whether this is mastery-based learning in that the bar for what you need to do in the course is set here, and you can have as many attempts to get there as you possibly can. The tricky thing with grades is they are used for many different purposes. They are not just used to measure learning. We could have a whole separate conversation about whether or not grades actually measure learning and what type of learning they measure. But we use them to rank students. We use them to decide who gets into certain specializations or into certain honors programs. So I think it's part of it, but so many of our institutional structures are baked into grading practices.
Just thought if you don't have the grade, then there's less of the pressure to use these tools in a way that's not helping them develop their skills.
Correct. Many students, having gone through an education system for 12 or 13 years, that, you know, they will not be happy with our grades. They want the grades, right?
UBC requires the grades.
Yeah.
Whether you're ungrading the course or not, you still have to put something in the box.
Yeah. We have credit defail as an option for some courses. That gets at part of that, but again, there's restrictions on whether or not those type of courses actually count towards GPA and other metrics that, again, students are very carefully attuned to. I used to teach the large intro physics course, and I asked students every year, how many of you want to go to med school? And 3/4 of the class would put their hand up. And that number of students putting their hand up was actually bigger than the UBC undergraduate medical program, even in that one route, right? It's like you're not all going to do this. Okay, let me pivot to some quick information on what we're doing. So I mentioned earlier, I had this admin leave. I fell into a whole number of projects around AI, and it was the perfect time for me because it meant when I came back to this role about 15 months ago, I had a clear plan of what we needed to do, and it wasn't a strategy. We needed a couple of years to figure this out. So I said, we're going to take a couple of years to figure this out. We're about halfway through that at the moment, and we're going to do 3 things in those 2 years. We're going to listen to faculty, staff, and students to find out what their experiences are, what they're concerned about. We're going to learn, and that's kind of 2 dimensions to that. We're going to learn from other institutions, because what I found during my admin leave, there are some institutions that are way ahead of us in terms of thinking, so we can learn from what they're doing. But also it's learning in terms of helping people articulate and develop some foundational competencies. Not everyone is going to need to be an expert in AI, but I do think we're moving into a space where we will expect all our students to have kind of foundational knowledge of how these tools work, when they go wrong, implications for bias, you know, whose voices are not represented in the training data set, how to know when to delegate to these tools and when not to. These kind of foundational level competencies, I think all our students are going to need. And then we wanted to set up a safe place for experimentation. And that was essentially a private sandbox environment where people could not worry about where is my data going, where is my students' intellectual property going. I'm not going to talk too much about the learning pillar. I've got a few slides on listening. What I will say on experimenting, we built this sandbox, we made it available to just a small group of projects that were funded through the TLEF round in that particular year. We learned the kind of support that those projects needed. And we had people knocking on the door saying, hey, I heard about this thing, can we have access to it? And we couldn't because there was no money. So we basically built this ourselves within the Learning Technology Hub in CTLT. Where we are now is we're working through the various governance processes at UBC. We've been to the executive, we're going to the board for a major capital investment in infrastructure, partnering with the VP research. So essentially the advanced research computing that some of you may have access to for your research will now, when refreshed, be made available for education purposes as well. And that will provide 3 things. It will provide baseline compute infrastructure, right? So GPUs and cloud credits. It will provide secure data storage, because just as your research data needs to be secure, then your intellectual property that you develop for courses and students' work that you might want to use in this space, that needs to be secure in the data sense as well. And most importantly, it will provide a kind of concierge support for people who are not expert in these technologies. We don't need faculty to learn how to build machine learning models or AI applications. We've got people who can do that. What we need is faculty to come with their use cases so that they can say, I have an idea in my course. And if you can build it, this is what the experience will be like for students, or this is what the experience will be like for me as an instructor. So that's going to happen, I think, in the next few months. Yeah, Sean.
So, having spoken to some of my computer science folks, colleagues, they don't think that there's enough infrastructure at UBC to support the GPU
Right.
that just UBC has. So what's the timeline that you foresee this happening? Because we can plan all we want, but math still doesn't have a new math building for the last 20 years. You've heard that 1,000 times. So
Oh yeah.
when do you foresee the space for GPUs that then we could start integrating these into our courses and teaching?
So I don't know what the lead time is for accessing the GPUs. So this is tied to the upgrade of the ARC, the Advanced Research Computing Infrastructure, which is getting to the end of life. The university made a major investment in about 2018 in this infrastructure. It's getting to the end of life. We're hoping to be able to bring this on stream in 2026, but I'm not as close. I'm not going to be involved in actually ordering the GPUs. Some of it, I think, will be hybrid cloud, right? So we can do some smaller stuff without necessarily needing the GPUs. We will need those for the really big workloads. And I think compared to what we'll use for education, it'll be pretty small compared to the research demands. So this is an issue we've got to figure out for our research.
When you do the cloud, do we have to have concerns about data sovereignty?
No, it will be in Canada and it will be ring fenced. Saw another hand at the back. No, okay. Okay, I said I wasn't going to talk too much about that, but that's something that we're working through at the moment, and it's a big investment. It's a big investment for the university. When we took it to the board, they were very supportive. They actually said, "Are you sure you're being ambitious enough?" Which is easy for the board to say because they don't have to find the money. But honestly, I don't know of any other Canadian university that's trying to do this, combining research and education to support that kind of infrastructure investment. So that's kind of exciting. I do want to talk a little bit about listening, because one of the things we said we would do is we talk to our students. So we surveyed students in the Christmas break last year. The only time slot we got to survey students, right? You can't survey them in the exam period, can't survey them at the start of term. So we got 14 days over the Christmas break. We thought we're never going to get student responses. We got 3,500 over the Christmas break. And it contained really rich information. This is how they're using these tools. At least how they say they are using these tools. The sorts of things that they were looking for, clear guidelines and policies, right? Some of this is unrealistic. They were saying, can we have a single policy for how we're supposed to use AI in all our courses? To which we had to say no, because faculty have the instructional autonomy to decide how, where, and if these tools are used. They were very clear that they wanted further education and training, help us to be critical consumers of these tools. Concerns about academic integrity, largely where they didn't know because there was nothing on the syllabus. We asked a question, what fraction of your courses does the syllabus contain a clear instruction about the use of these tools? And the modal answer was less than 50%. Right? So that's pretty clear what we need to do. They had ethical concerns. They had environmental concerns, actually. What about the footprint of this? And that was something we'd not considered at all. We started to educate ourselves, basically. And I think as an institution, we've kind of not focused on our digital footprint as an institution post-COVID. And I'm sure many of you have seen the sort of reports of the environmental cost of a single ChatGPT query, or how much water is used to cool the data centers and things like that. Individual queries are tiny. Of course, the concern comes when this is accommodating billions of requests per day. But it's still pretty small compared to things that we take for granted, like streaming video, streaming HD video on Zoom meetings and things like that. Not to say that we shouldn't pay attention to it, but for me, what that set of student comments prompted us to do is think more deeply about our digital footprint as an institution, which I don't think is something we've done or done enough of. Student responses were also really varied and really nuanced. And it made me realize that the sort of canonical way that we try and get student feedback on this is we put the elected AMS person on a committee, right? And say, please represent the perspective of your 60,000 students. And they can't possibly do that because there are multiple perspectives. And so one of the things we've done since then in conjunction with the VP Students Office is we've set up a student generative AI council. It has about 35 members, grad students and undergrad students, both campuses, to try and capture some of those diverse perspectives and represent more completely the student body and make sure that their voices, no problem, that's okay, it's all right. Make sure that their perspectives are heard in this, because they had really sophisticated takes on what they needed from these tools and what they thought the university should be doing. One of the things that they have produced is, I was a little bit frustrated that this general approach to educating students, helping them understand core competencies in this area was not really being done. And my concern was a lot of it would fall to faculty teaching first year courses. So we set up this series of things called 10 things. 10 things UBC students should know about X. And the Student Generative AI Council actually wrote the 10 things that UBC students should know about generative AI. Kind of guided them a little bit. One of the things I was really pleased to see, and this is their work, not mine, is the very first thing was don't cheat your future self, right? So it gets right at that, yes, you can use these, but don't overuse them too much. So I think, amplifying that student voice when it's from students and for students, I think is really powerful. Okay, so that's some of the things we're doing at the institution level. Faculty or department level, I think there does need to be some of these conversations about what are the graduate outcomes from our degrees? How are these shifting? And how do we then build opportunities for students to develop those capacities or competencies through the program? And it reminds me an awful lot of the process that we had to go through with COVID, in that it's a sort of cycle of we need to learn about, in COVID time, we need to learn about online learning, because for most faculty that wasn't their sort of normal space. It's this idea of learning what these tools can do, designing learning opportunities for students, actually building those courses, and then deploying them, and doing that iteratively. And I think also as well, and you've clearly got that with this seminar and other discussions, mechanism to share and cross-pollinate successes and failures, rather than people working in isolation and thinking, after the fact, oh, I wish I'd not done that, right? I don't think we do enough of sharing things that don't work, and there are many things that don't work in this space. One of the things I wanted to point out is CTLT sits in my portfolio. Over the last couple of years, they have changed the way they architect a lot of their events and activities. So they now have a dedicated site for resources around AI. And yes, there's still the events that you can go to in person. They're not kind of show and tell events. Quite often, one of the most successful things they've done is an hour-long session called 30+30, which is the first 30 minutes is someone describing a feature of a tool, and then the next 30 minutes is people actually opening their laptops and doing stuff on their courses. Resources, and I'll share a slide of how we're packaging resources differently using AI tools to help you access them and navigate them. One of the best things they've done is this thing called replays, which is essentially every event, every studio in an indexed, searchable repository. I'm not going to call it like Netflix because it's not as much fun as Netflix. But for example, should you want to know how and what tools you can use to run models locally on your laptop without an internet connection, so your data is perfectly secure, it never leaves your machine, there's a 45-minute webinar on how to do that, how to get the tools, and how to install them on your machine. So curating these replays, I think is really, really, really important. Oh, I've just lost the internet connection again, so that's a little bit
It heard
inconvenient.
you.
It said, fine, if you don't want me,
Yeah.
see how that goes for you.
Okay, well, you can't see it, but we're going to have an even smaller screen here. I'm going to turn my laptop on. Oh, okay, we're back. There we go, we're back. Excellent. Temporary interruption. Perfect. Okay. Continue to share. All right, I said we were repackaging resources differently. So one of the things I've been talking about is rethinking assessments in the era of AI. So this was the basis of a workshop that was done, but the resources were all collected in Notebook LM, which is a Google tool that allows you to interrogate these resources through a sort of ChatGPT-like interface. So you can ask questions, summarize these resources for me. Tell me the 3 top things that came out of this discussion. So actually using the tools to be able to disseminate the materials from sessions. Moving down to the course and assignment level, I would like to say every course syllabus needs a clear statement on where, how, and if students can use these tools. And that probably needs to look different for different assessments. So you might not want to detail that in the syllabus, but you might want to put a kind of overarching statement and say specific instructions on AI use will accompany the essay when we get to the essay. One of the things we put together is this flow chart, and I know that's too small for you to read, but it's essentially a flow chart for the #1 question that students ask in our Academic Integrity Hub, which is, can I use these tools in my course? So the top box says, does your syllabus give you explicit instructions? No? Talk to your prof, because they might not have put something in explicitly. What we came to realize, and again, we workshopped this with that student council, students will use, the only bit we really have control over is whether or not they use these tools in assessed work. We know they're using them for all types of things to support their learning, right? Putting in lecture slides into one of these tools and saying, can you give me 15 practice calculus problems based on this? Then we have to educate them about, well, that's not your intellectual property, right? That's the faculty member's intellectual property. So they're using these tools to support their learning in all different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of intellectual property, as a writer, there are also concerns about how they were trained.
Yeah, absolutely. Because essentially no permission was sought to access this information. It was out there somewhere, whether you as a writer or as a photographer or an artist knew that your work was being scraped off Wikipedia and other parts of the internet. So there's all kinds of issues about what goes into these tools and also what is left out as well. In other words, what voices are not represented within. So we've sort of come to the realization that, when I said students are going to use these tools, they're going to use these tools to support their learning. And any syllabus now that says you are not allowed to use generative AI tools at all during this course, it's just going to be ignored by students because it's not their reality, right? There are legitimate ways that they can use the tools to support their learning. Yeah, please.
Thank you. And I really appreciate a statement that was made earlier just about incentivization for grading how and why students choose to use certain strategies to try to get that higher number or versus actually learning, having competencies. One of the challenges is that these are effectively, the LLMs are effectively going to be a new form of operating system, which means everybody's going to have in their pockets, on their laptops, an agentic enabled, Gen AI enabled operating system. So the question around bring your own device for examinations comes to the fore. Because if we're asking students to bring their own device for exams, we're inviting that complexity into the assessment process. So I just wanted to, so I really appreciate that point about the incentives.
Yeah, we're the current things we're grappling with bring your own device is locking down someone's browser so they don't have tabs open that they can do other things in. You're right, when students show up, and I am sure a good number of our students know how to run models locally on their own devices. And then how, if they're bringing those devices into assessments, how do we know that they're not using those tools? I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to get through the last few slides again. I will share these and you've got access to all the links. A couple of things I found really useful when thinking and talking with people about redesigning assessment. This is one, it's called the AI assessment scale. It gives you a fairly simple framework for thinking about how AI may or may not be used in a given assignment, all the way from no AI at the top, planning, collaboration, full AI, or just for exploration. So that's fairly helpful. The other thing, I mentioned this Digital Education Council group that we've joined. They had a really, really good publication on the next era of assessment. I have to say, when I first saw this, I was immediately skeptical when I saw the word Pearson, right, having railed against students having to pay for online homework systems that were bundled with textbooks. But it's actually very, very good. And it's talking about AI resilience as a baseline design principle for assessments. Make it so that your assessments aren't single shot prompts that students can just put into an AI. They also talk about AI-free assessment, how to make sure that you're making visible the processes of learning rather than just assessing the final product. So there's lots of practical strategies in here. It's almost like a compendium that you can browse through. Okay, takeaways. I realize that people have very different personal opinions and experience with these tools, but they are quickly becoming general purpose technology. As you said, this is available on every phone now, every computing device, baked into applications that we rely on for the work that we do and the work that our students do. I've long since espoused the view that students should be active partners in the sort of co-creation of their own education. This gives us such a great opportunity to partner with students. They are partners and allies here. They can uncover perspectives and uses, and I have to say it's been an absolute delight to work with that Student AI Council, and they've been really challenging as well, right? It's not been comfortable at times. So I would strongly advocate bringing students into this conversation. And there are both individual and collective perspectives that are important. What am I going to do in my course? And what do we need to do as a department or a faculty or a discipline? And I think, your conversations need to span that range of breadth, if you like, or that distance. So I realise I haven't given many definitive answers because there are no definitive answers here. But hopefully that was useful. I'm happy to share the slides. I'm also happy, I've got nothing for the next half an hour, so if people want to ask questions afterwards, I'm happy to stay around as well.